Ushtlave, radiant peace and happiness to everybody. And today I wanted to share my story of how I came to the good religion. And it's quite a long story, but I'll keep it short for the purposes of time limits. But it started basically when I always had these questions about my own religious upbringing. My parents were church hoppers. They went from being Seventh-day Adventist to going to the evangelical Calvary Chapel, and then later on the Calvinist, and then the Congregationalist. So that was my upbringing. But I always had these questions because I was often told by my pastor, if you believe in Jesus, you got nothing to lose if you're wrong. But if you're like an atheist, you got a lot to lose if you're wrong. But as I started researching other religions, there's many Muslims who believe that Christians are going to hell because they believe in the Holy Trinity. They're worshiping more than one God, which is the only unforgivable sin in the Quran. And so looking at this, seeing how Muslims believe Christians are going to hell and Christians believe Muslims are going to hell, Jewish people nowadays, I don't think Jewish people nowadays believe in hell, but Jewish people during the time of the Pharisees, many of the Pharisees believed the Christians were going to hell. So I was at this place where I was kind of like, wow, I got a lot to lose. And so I prayed to God, and I asked God to show me the right religion. And that night I had a dream that I was with these survivors of the end of the world. Like we were hanging out on the moon, and we were watching as the world was covered with molten magma, and there was just a chunk of the earth left. And we were talking about how the earth needs to be replenished, it needs to be revitalized, it needs to start over again. And basically, there was a man who had a Persian accent who was standing on a Persian rug in front of a fire. Now at this time I never heard of Zoroastrianism, so already Zoroastrian symbolism is being shown to me. And he said that he was from Earth's past, before the ethics got convoluted, before they got complicated. And that really all that's required of us is just to be kind to one another. And God doesn't really care how you pray or even if you believe in Him or not. The point is that we're supposed to be kind and love one another. And so that was one outcome that showed up in the dream. And then the scene shifted to where I was in a tractor going up this ramp to the pearly gates of heaven to be judged. And so I see this light in the clouds saying, "What have you done for me?" And I said, I believed in you. And then, God said, God doesn't trust you. And I began to descend into hell, but I woke up before I actually got there. Well, at the time, when I was a teenager, I had a different interpretation of the dream. It wasn't until I read the Gathas when I actually got what the dream meant. And at the time, I was kind of like, whoa, God's telling me if I keep listening to heavy metal music or stuff like that, I'm going to hell. which was something that the Calvinist Church was telling me a lot of at that time, because I was a young metalhead at that time. And so, anyway, that was the beginning of my path. My parents moved from the city of Arcadia to Claremont, and since I was a teenager at the time, I moved with them. And in Claremont, there is a small Zoroastrian community. And Armand Ariana, who is the chairperson of the California Zoroastrian Center, I met him. And we became friends. Sometimes I'd help him out over at the men's clothing store that he owns. And we became friends, and I asked him, where could I find a copy of the Gathas? Because I was already developing an interest in Zoroastrianism right there. And he led me to the Zoroastrian Assembly's website, and I read the Gathas for free. I started with Ali Jaffrey's translation, and I have much respect for Ali Jaffrey for his scholarship. Where I've gotten to now, though, I have some disagreements, but I think he's a fine Zoroastrian. I just tend to, but anyway, that's another conversation. But I just tend to see Ahura Mazda differently than he does, but he's still a fine Zoroastrian and a great scholar. So I read that translation, which gave me my start. And I was seeing righteousness for the sake of righteousness alone, which is our main motto, the Ashambhohu mantra. And I was taken back to that dream I had when I was 17. And now I realized it was kind of like I could either keep on believing in God out of fear, or I could practice righteousness for the sake of righteousness without fear of punishment or expectation of reward, and create a new world, starting with myself, but spreading it to the collective. Because after all, good thoughts, good words, and good deeds are contagious. They are contagious, but they're kind of a contagious antibody, not a contagious disease. And so, here's what I have to say, is that if you're clinging on to your religion because you are afraid that if you don't, you suffer some fate in the afterlife, remember that any one of those religions could be right or wrong. And so you'd have plenty to lose by practicing either of them, if any of them are wrong. So, rather than practice something out of fear, rather than venerate God out of fear, why not just do righteousness for the sake of righteousness alone? And everything will just kind of come together anyway, because it's the purest intent without a filter, like I said on the previous video. I mean, in Zoroastrianism, there's a wide variety. We have people that, like myself, who see Ahura Mazda not as a separate being from nature, but as the mind within nature. You have Zoroastrians like Ali Jaffrey, who see Ahura Mazda as separate from nature. Either way, though, we would both agree, though, that we attune ourselves to Ahura Mazda for the sake of attuning ourselves to Ahura Mazda. and not out of fear of any kind of punishment. It's a pure intention. So I say this. If you say, well, I believe in Jesus because then I have nothing to lose. Well, okay, believing in Jesus, that's cool. Jesus was a very fine sous-chant. Or saying like, well, I believe Muhammad's the final prophet and all these prophets that came before him because I have nothing to lose. Well, if you're believing out of fear, you have plenty to lose. So why not just do righteousness for the sake of righteousness alone? That very pure intention, that very pure focus, that very pure action, very pure words. Why not just live by that? Because you know what? You would have nothing to lose. Ushtave, and radiant peace and happiness to everybody.